Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is November 30th. On this day in 1989, a 51-year-old electronics store owner named Richard Mallory picked up a hitchhiker along a Florida highway. She was a sex worker, and his encounter with 33-year-old Aileen Wuornos would end in Mallory's death. 2 weeks later, his body was found in the woods. He had been shot multiple times and partially hidden under an old carpet. Wuornos would later be linked to 6 more killings. But today, we're talking about how it all began with the murder of Richard Mallory. Let's get started. By late 1989, Aileen Wuornos was drifting through a tough and unstable life on Florida's highways. She'd endured a childhood filled with abandonment and abuse and had been supporting herself through sex work since her teens. Now in her early 30s, Aileen was bouncing between motels, drinking heavily, hitchhiking, and relying on the money she made from the men who picked her up. She was living in Volusia County with her girlfriend, Tyria Moore. They depended almost entirely on Wuornos' income, but her profession was dangerous. Aileen had been in some scary situations, and by that point, she often carried a .22 caliber revolver with her for protection. Richard Mallory, on the other hand, lived a quieter life on the opposite side of the state in Clearwater. He ran a small electronics repair shop, and according to news reports and later court documents, he struggled with alcoholism. He also had a reputation for being a bit of a loner. But that wasn't all there was to Richard Mallory. Years after his death, records would reveal a disturbing piece of his past: a prior conviction for sexual assault in Maryland, for which he'd served time in a maximum security facility. This revelation, which was largely unknown at the time of Aileen's trial, would later add fuel to debates over Wuornos' claim that she killed him in self-defense. But at the time, those details were hidden. On November 30th, 1989, these two deeply damaged lives crossed paths along a stretch of Florida highway. According to later court documents and Aileen Wuornos' own statements, Mallory picked her up that day while she was hitchhiking and offering sex for money. They drove off together in his car. From that moment forward, the only version of events comes from Wuornos, and that version shifted over time. In her first confession, Wuornos said that Mallory took her to a remote, wooded area where they planned to have sex. She claimed he became aggressive, and when she thought he was going to rob or rape her, she grabbed her bag, fought him for her gun, and fired. Later, Wuornos gave a much darker version of the story. She said that Mallory had tied her up, raped her repeatedly, and threatened to kill her. Fearing for her life, she said, she managed to free herself, grab her weapon, and shoot him. Prosecutors would argue otherwise. They said that the murder was cold, calculated, and motivated by robbery. They talked about how Wuornos handled things after the shooting. She covered his body, she stole his car and belongings, and later pawned some of his items. What's undisputed is this: after the shots were fired, Mallory's body was left in the woods, and Wuornos drove off in his car. The day after the killing, December 1st, Volusia County deputies discovered Mallory's abandoned car near Ormond Beach, stuck in the brush on the side of the road. Inside, they found his wallet, some condoms, and an empty bottle of vodka. But Mallory was nowhere to be found. For nearly 2 weeks, he was considered missing. Then, on December 13th, his body was discovered in a wooded area not far from where his car had been left. He'd been shot multiple times with a .22 caliber handgun, and 2 bullets to his left lung had caused fatal internal bleeding. Investigators found no immediate suspects. The idea that he'd been killed by a hitchhiker he picked up on the highway wasn't even on their radar yet. That would only come later, when more bodies began to turn up. Back at the motel, Wuornos reportedly returned the same day Mallory's car was found. She was drunk, and according to later court testimony, she told Tyria Moore that she'd killed a man, taken his belongings, and dumped his car. Over the next year, more men would be found dead along Florida highways, shot in similar ways, and often stripped of their valuables. It wasn't long before police realized they might be dealing with a serial killer. The break in the case came through old-fashioned detective work. Investigators connected pawned items, a crashed car, and fingerprint evidence to a woman who was using aliases. That woman was Aileen Wuornos. Her girlfriend, Tyria Moore, also surfaced as someone who'd been seen with the victims' vehicles. Aileen Wuornos was arrested in January 1991 at a biker bar. Days later, police located Moore in Pennsylvania. She agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for immunity. Under their guidance, she made a series of recorded phone calls to Wuornos, pleading for the truth. And Aileen confessed. She admitted to multiple killings, including that of Richard Mallory. In January 1992, Wuornos stood trial for Mallory's murder. Under Florida Williams rule, prosecutors were allowed to bring in evidence from 5 other killings to show a pattern. It was a rare and powerful move that gave jurors a broader view of Wuornos' alleged crimes. The state's case was that Mallory had been lured, shot, and robbed, and that she had told Moore what she had done. Her attorneys argued that the killing had been in self-defense. They said that Mallory had attacked and raped Aileen, and that she was terrified and fought back. Mental health experts testified that Wuornos had a long history of abuse, trauma, and borderline personality disorder, all conditions that may have distorted her thinking. But the jury never heard the full extent of Mallory's criminal past. While some of it came out later through appeals and investigative reporting, at the time it remained largely unknown. To them, he was just a store owner who picked up the wrong hitchhiker. Aileen Wuornos was found guilty of first-degree murder and armed robbery. She was sentenced to death. The judge cited multiple aggravating factors, including the cruelty of the act and the motive of financial gain. Richard Mallory's murder was the first of 7 killings Wuornos would later be linked to. Her story, and his, have sparked endless debate. Some believe Wuornos' version of events in the Mallory case, especially after learning about his prior rape conviction. Others believe that the evidence points to a premeditated killing and that it was part of a broader pattern of luring, robbing, and eliminating her victims. In her final years, Wuornos gave contradictory interviews. Sometimes she said all the killings were in self-defense. Other times she admitted she just wanted the money. Aileen Wuornos was executed in 2002 after receiving 6 death sentences. But to this day, the Mallory case and what really happened that night remains the most debated part of her story. 2 people, both carrying decades of pain, met on a highway. One ended up dead. The other became one of the most infamous women in the history of American crime. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!